Good morning, and thank you for joining us for this important program. I'm Dan Kuntz, MOCPA's Senior Director of Learning and Development. With everything going on in our world, so many of our members are hearing a call to action. Many have said they want to make a difference in their organization and community, but are wondering how. As you hopefully saw, we sent a statement to all members taking a stand against racial injustice. And this is not new territory for us. Diversity and inclusion is one of the 6 pillars in our MOCPA strategic plan. Our key volunteers made the decision a few years ago that one of our priorities would be to create awareness, recruit, retain, and advance minorities in our profession. We have never wavered from this commitment. Our Diversity and Inclusion Committee met last month to review our strategies and to establish new initiatives for the coming year. This includes today's webinar, as well as the one on the July 24th addressing belonging and unconscious bias. We are also in the process of enhancing our diversity and inclusion resource webpage, and we'll be adding more learning opportunities soon. In addition, we are working on a mentoring program and planning outreach to firms and companies with resources on how to create workplaces that value diversity, equity, and inclusion. While conversations surrounding these topics are often difficult, they are essential. We appreciate your participation today, and please do not hesitate to ask any questions via the Zoom chat feature. We are all here to learn, grow, and become more inclusive leaders. Now, without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Kira Kimball. Kira is the Chief Innovation Officer with Marsh and McLennan Agency. She will be providing us with a model framework for inclusive leadership development, outlining key traits of inclusive leaders, and teaching us how to assess inclusivity of leadership within our own organizations. Kira, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be with you this morning and have been looking forward to this webinar all week long. I'm so excited to help you kick off your diversity, equity, and inclusion learning. And during this time, the last 4 months, when we've moved through COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter, so many organizations are really sitting up and paying attention. And they're really asking themselves, what can we do as an organization? So this presentation is very timely because my hunch is many of you have been reflecting upon what you would like to do as individuals. And when we think about engaging diversity, equity, and inclusion in your society as members, starting with leadership is really important. And it's also important for you to know that this isn't just about title or role. This has everything to do with leading at every level. So today I will be introducing you to inclusive leadership, pushing beyond leadership buy-in to leadership in action. The learning outcomes today, I'll be teaching you about a model framework, defining inclusive traits, giving you an opportunity to discover how to assess what you're currently doing as leaders. And then finally, we know that organizations impact their communities. So I will be giving you some ideas about how you can take your inclusivity out of the 4 walls of your organization and into your community. So let me talk a little bit about what I mean when I'm talking about diversity. So certainly what has come up right now is race and ethnicity due to the civil unrest in our communities that we have seen over the last few months. But really, when we think of our workplaces, diversity means a lot of different things, and how our team members and how we as ourselves show up in the workplace. So this honeycomb model gives you an idea that there's lots of different spectrums on the diversity scale, and that the reality is each of us has some sort of diversity story. Why is inclusive leadership what we need right now? When I am out and about talking with individuals about diversity, equity, and inclusion, so many leaders say to me, can I not just be a good leader and a nice person? Isn't that enough to show that I care about people? And the reality is it's not enough, because inclusive leaders don't play it safe. They are really interested in looking at the policies, the practices, the procedures, and the cultures of their workplace, and really dismantling anything that becomes a barrier to inclusivity. So inclusive leadership is really the next level of engaging as a leader and looking at individuals, your employees, your colleagues, your clients, and customers really as people, and humanizing their role beyond the job description or the job code. It really values authenticity and allowing people to show up as their whole self when they come to the workplace. Because the reality is, employees who do not feel adequately recognized are 2 times more likely as those who do feel adequately recognized to quit in the next year. And when we say recognized, I'm really referring to being seen and valued and understood as a person. So let's look at some engagement statistics. I know that this is important to you as employers. About 70% of US employees are not engaged in the workplace. In fact, 50 to 70% of workers who quit their jobs are quitting their manager. They're not quitting the work they do or necessarily their company, but they're quitting the person they work for. So thinking differently about how we lead has everything to do with attaining and attracting new talent. 83% of us believe that engaged and motivated people are the top factor when we're thinking about a company's revenue, profit, and success. But the reality is that employees who identify as authentic, and I'll talk about what that means at work, 16% were more engaged than those who do not identify as authentic. And when you think about that engagement, that is going to boost your bottom line, as well as your brand as an industry leader and as your employer brand. Ultimately, high engagement, we know, leads to productivity and retention. And a culture of inclusivity is going to help you along that way. So these statistics are really the foundation for motivating us to see there's a true business case for how we lead. And when we can have an opportunity to create a culture and a practice in our culture that creates engagement, that's when we win as organizations and our team wins and they're thriving. So let's talk a little bit about authenticity. As I indicated, that is a great contributor to engagement. But the reality is, many of us who come to the workplace, we don't feel completely safe to be who we are. We don't feel comfortable sharing all of our identities. And in fact, we hide some of that. And that concept is called covering. And if you can imagine thinking about a core part of who you are, whether it's who you love, what your religious belief might be, how you grew up, your veteran status. For myself, my own diversity story was struggling with mental illness for several years. In fact, I struggled so much that I had to leave the workplace for 2 years. And when I came back, you bet I covered. I was so afraid of what my employer, what my colleagues might say about me, their belief in my ability and competency for opportunities and promotions. And mental health, again, is just one part of that diversity spectrum. So when someone covers themselves, that takes a lot of energy. And that's energy that your team could be using to innovate, to create different solutions, to help you create different products and services, enter different markets, you name it. That energy that they're using to cover could be used for business good. And the reality is, over 60% of us cover part of our identity when we come into the workplace because we're afraid we'll be judged, or we'll be stereotyped, or we won't be given the opportunity that others might who are different than we are. We just left celebrating Pride Month last month with the LGBTQ plus community, and 50% of this community remains closeted in the workplace and not bringing their whole selves to work. So I'm going to turn the page, and I'm actually going to share with you some examples of covering self-talk. This page could go on for many more, but I just want you to get into the voice of what some of your team and maybe yourself says when you come into the workplace and you cross that threshold. Coworkers keep inviting me to bring my boyfriend to work events, but I'm really afraid to because he's Black. I haven't brought photos of my partner and me to work because then they'll know I'm gay. I'm so nervous my coworkers are going to ask me why I'm fasting. What will they think of me as a Muslim? I'm so thankful that I'm white passing. I'm not sure how my team would feel about me coming from a family from Mexico. The team asks me to go out with them every Thursday night. I keep saying I'm busy. I can't tell them I'm going to AA. I'm going to wait as long as I can to tell my boss I'm pregnant. I really want that promotion. My colleagues keep telling me I'm such a hero because I'm a vet, but I really just want to tell them I'm overcome by my PTSD. So these examples are self-talk that our team members, ourselves might be saying when we come into the workplace because we're afraid again of judgment and of stereotyping. And in the self-talk, we're not showing up authentically as our whole selves. So this is really when inclusive leadership comes to play. This book that I'm introducing you to is so accessible and so approachable. It's called How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And I'm really going to be walking you through this framework today to give you an idea about what you might be able to step into for your own development and also for your leadership team's opportunities. I really want everyone to understand that this is a journey. It is never a destination. And while organizations are adopting this at different speeds, people within organizations also have different adoption speeds. So it's really important if you are stepping into diversity, equity, and inclusion in your business to honor the process and the journey. So I picked out this image really intentionally. This isn't the traditional asphalt image of a clear sky and an easy highway to maneuver. This is kind of foggy. The little steps are a little uncertain, and that's important for you to know if you're going to engage in this work. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and a step backward, but keep in mind, those intentions and that purpose will have great results, but it most definitely is a journey. And when you think of your own development, it's important to keep that in mind. So this is what I'm going to be covering today for the core work here about inclusive leadership as a continuum. These are the 4 spots on the continuum I'm going to share with you. The first 2, unaware and aware, are really more personal, really more private, and something that a person is having from their individual perspective to gain self-awareness. Stages 3 and stages 4 are more public. They're more risk-taking. They ask you to step into the uncomfortable to really help make changes for yourself and then also for your organization. And within this continuum, thinking about your different communities, you might see yourselves maybe fully over in Activate for one cultural community, but maybe you're at the beginning stage for another one. Let's pop up a poll here to get an idea about all of the businesses who are on this webinar today. And again, this is completely anonymous, but your society is really trying to gather information if you have diversity and inclusion as a strategy in your business currently, because it will inform their practices in terms of creating learning and development opportunities for you. So if you go ahead and complete that panel, or excuse me, that poll, we'll take a second and then we'll share those anonymous results to get an idea of the businesses here. All right, thank you everyone for participating. It looks like just over 50% of you do have a diversity and inclusion strategy and the other 50% do not. So that's incredibly exciting to me as someone who's been making the rounds with this presentation throughout the country from my kitchen table in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And it's encouraging to see those of you who've committed and those of you who are leaning in to learn more. So we're excited about that. So I'm going to jump in here and change to the next slide and start teaching a little bit about the first stage on this continuum, the unaware stage. And what's going on with leaders during this time or people during this time is they really lack knowledge around issues of inclusion or how inequalities are perpetuated. And that may have everything to do with where a person grew up and how they were taught and what their environment looked like when they were young. I think of myself growing up in a small town in South Dakota called Huron, where we didn't have a lot of physical diversity as an example. And within that, I didn't have a lot of experiences when I was younger with diverse folks. So really, in my experience, and perhaps you've had this as well, you were part of the majority demographic. And when we're not exposed to different people, we don't necessarily have experiences of exclusion. When I think about my own experiences growing up, I was called carrot top and freckle face. And that's about as challenging as my feelings of being excluded, but they still mattered. But really my awareness of individuals of different race, ethnicity, religion, worldview were very limited. And the reality is leaders during this stage don't really realize the inequalities that are often built into our systems. And when we think of businesses, how we recruit, how we develop, how we promote, how we give special projects to. And these are the things, if we are trying to change our business and our industry, that we need to dismantle. And then finally, individuals in this stage really look at diversity as compliance related. This is about the EEOC and ticking off the boxes. There isn't a real awareness that diversity enriches our organization, moving us from more of a homogeneity kind of organization to one that is more heterogeneous and celebrates those differences because we know it can help our organization. Second stage is aware. In this stage, you really start to gain some awareness that you don't know about others' experiences, and that you really start seeing that perhaps the reality that I make decisions through, whether they're moral, whether they're business, you name it, maybe that's not the only reality that exists. And maybe there are different worldviews that other people might have. And you might realize that you've been making decisions solely on your perspectives without inviting other diverse perspectives into your decision-making. You also are starting to realize that perhaps you've had some advantages in your life, based on how you grew up. Having two parents is one of the top examples when we think about advantage and how a young person will grow up, be educated, and the opportunities they will have in the workplace. That's just one example. You might also start thinking about your own disadvantages and compare yourselves to other people. And you'll be thinking about colleagues in this stage that maybe they've had a harder road of it, and you'll recognize why that may have been. Finally, you'll start thinking about who are the people that supported me on my journey, or who are the kinds of people that support me now. And this will also prompt you to start thinking, how am I supporting people? Who am I investing in? I think of my own journey as an inclusive leader. And I know I'm 50 years old this year. I will say that proudly. And I know in my journey, I have often supported women who are like me because I know how to work with women who are like me. And that affinity makes things easy for me. But during this stage, we really start getting this awareness that there might be others who need my support. And if you're stepping into inclusive leadership, that's something that you're going to start thinking about. So again, the first two stages are really about personal awareness and thinking about your own experience, how you got there, who helped you get there, and maybe thinking differently about others' situations. So the active person, really moving on the scale of inclusive leadership, you're starting to use that awareness to act differently. You're putting yourself in places of discomfort. Remember when I talked about being freckle-faced or carrot top as an example, when I felt different? In this kind of situation, an inclusive leader is going to seek out places of difference to really learn about them. This might be going to a festival of cultures downtown. And I know some of these things aren't happening right now because of the state we're in. For me, an example would be, I went to an African-American church. And when I showed up, there was one other person who looked like me. And it was a wonderful experience to be able to put myself in my Black colleagues' shoes, to know when they enter a business meeting in my industry and in my firm, they often are the only one in that situation, or a Muslim, whatever example that might be. So you're really going to lean in and get curious about difference. You're going to start to recognize, wow, some of the things that I've been doing, I'm always promoting men. I'm always giving these projects to extroverts who are like me, and I know they know how to do this. I'm always working with organizations where I feel safe, where I'm not afraid how this is going to impact us if we give here. And you really start shedding those unproductive behaviors and thoughts because they get in the way of inclusion. And when you're developing as an inclusive leader, you want to disrupt that thinking. And the reality is you're going to start saying things out loud. If you remember the continuum, this becomes public now. And you're starting to talk with your team about these ideas. You're starting to ask them about, you know, what are our candidates when we bring in new talent? Do they look diverse? Are we trying to source differently for diverse talent? And you're really going to use your voice to look at your organization, talk with your colleagues, talk with your team about doing different. And the reality is during this time, this activating, when you're starting to practice these new behaviors and you're doing learning, because you're being public, you're going to be faced with people who don't agree with you. And they will be naysayers. There will be resistance. And this can be incredibly challenging because this work, when you decide to commit to being an inclusive organization and an inclusive leader, it takes a lot of energy because there's a lot of emotion around this, because there's a lot of values that come into play. And so the inclusive leader who's practicing these active behaviors, you are going to confront. You are going to talk with individuals and not allow those types of jokes. And that's really when it's going to come along to the advocate stage. But the important thing in this stage is while you're starting to educate those around you about your learnings and your opportunities as an organization, people are going to be at a different point in your journey. And I know this for myself because sometimes I just want to say, holy smokes, how come this is so hard to understand? It's a huge value and differentiator for our organization. But the reality is we have to give people space to also do the self-work. So this is when you start telling individuals your journey and some of the things that you've done, whether you've got online and you've watched uncomfortable conversations with a Black man, those TED Talks, there's 4 of them right now. Maybe you've read a little something about how to be an anti-racist as an example, and you start educating those around you so they can start the journey right alongside of you. Finally, this is the advocacy stage, and this is when you're stepping fully into being an inclusive leader. You really are going to start to commit to disrupting practices that get in the way of inclusion. And this takes effort, and this takes collaboration with individuals within your organization, whether it's with In HR, whether it's with how you define who gets your customers or the larger customers, but you become more aware of inequities in your organization and you do something about it. And you become bolder now in terms of challenging decisions and saying, I don't know if this makes sense for us any longer. And are we bringing in other voices to the table for strategic planning, for different work groups? Are you ensuring that there are multiple perspectives coming in? And so you're able to problem solve and to generate solutions at a higher level because of the diversity around the table. Finally, well, almost finally, you're going to be really interested in how your team members feel. This is something that you're going to check in with people. I think of myself when George Floyd was killed as an example, and I knew that what this was happening in our community, and to my Black colleagues and friends, I reached out to them. And it's an interesting experience to reach out to someone because of their color. And that was the reason that I was reaching out to them, to acknowledge the fact that what I'm feeling pales in comparison to what they are feeling and what their families are feeling, how they're talking with their children. So that is an example of being really interested in checking in with colleagues and learning about their experiences, not only outside of the workplace, but are they feeling valued in the workplace? Are you having stay interviews with colleagues of color, as an example, to find out why they're staying? Do you have a professionals of color group, as an example, or colleague resource groups for women, for individuals in the LGBTQ+ community, multi-generations, you name it? Are you giving opportunities for your team to gather around their diversity and to celebrate that, but also to educate the rest of us in your business? Finally, this comes with commitment. This is not something that can take a back burner if you commit to this, because one of the things that can get in the way right now for businesses, and I've seen this a lot on LinkedIn over the last couple months, many companies are making statements around Black Lives Matter and around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And those bold statements are important, and we've done that too. So I applaud the society for saying this is who we are and what we believe in. But the second part of this is the action, right? We want to make sure that our video and audio are in line, and that the actual behaviors that we're demonstrating as leaders, as organizations, follow with what we are saying. So it's not just about optics, it really is about action. And you all know that in order to lift something up in an organization, there has to be resources committed to it. That might be time, that might be an individual, it might be developing D&I committees throughout your organization or your locations that help lift this. It will be about putting some dollars in it, and maybe even thinking differently about how you volunteer as an organization and where you show up. Are you maybe volunteering at the Multicultural Center or the New American program with Lutheran Social Services, or wherever that's in your different communities? Where are you giving your dollars? For us, there's an opportunity to give our dollars at the South Dakota Black History Museum. So really thinking holistically about yourselves as an organization and how you're recruiting. I know some businesses, they look at their slate of candidates and they want to make sure at least a third of those candidates come from some diverse background, as indicated in their resume, or the best way that they can discern that. You ultimately are going to start sponsoring diverse talent. Again, think of my story, investing in young women for so many years. Where I've pivoted for myself is I am now mentoring a young Black professional man, very different from me, but it's challenging me to think differently about who I invest in and what I'm trying to accomplish in my organization, and to make changes that will ultimately impact our communities. So 6 leadership traits I want you to pull away from besides the continuum, and thinking about where you are on that and where your opportunities might be for growth. Inclusive leaders are committed. I definitely articulated that. This is not something that you do every once in a while. If you're really about making change in your organization, you have to be committed to it. And you've got to be courageous. Being bold and confronting behaviors, practices, policies that don't affirm individuals is critical. I see we have poll number 2 that popped up. And again, this is completely anonymous. Would you share with the society if you currently have a leadership development program? Because this is a great opportunity to embed inclusive leadership training into a leadership development program. So go ahead and answer that poll, and I'll move on to being cognizant. And that really means being self-aware, knowing your own blind spots. And I'm so glad that unconscious bias conversation is coming up next this month, because that's where we led when we began our diversity and inclusion initiatives at MMA about 1.5 years ago. When we can really grow that self-awareness and see where we might have some biases, and we can slow those down and replace them with different ways of thinking, that will make a difference for us. So your self-awareness as a leader is really going to translate into organizational awareness. And that's when that change can really happen. Being curious. Oh, here we go. All right, let's look at the poll. Again, this is about the exact number. 53% of you have L&D programs, which is wonderful. And I'm sure that makes Dan cheer. And 47% of you right now don't have a formal program. So great opportunities here to start thinking about inclusive leadership as part of that curriculum, or perhaps start your learning and development program with inclusive leadership. Thanks for that. And again, these are just data collection points for the society, completely anonymous. So curious, being really curious and leaning in. And curious can be a double-edged sword. Sometimes we're curious with suspicion and doubt. That's not the curiousness that an inclusive leader is going to bring to the table. A curious, inclusive leader is going to have genuine interest. They're going to want to get to know that person as an individual beyond that job code and really humanize the relationship in the workplace. Again, back to that conversation about authenticity. When you, as an organization, modeled by your leaders, create an environment where we can show up wholly as who we are, that's when you're going to get our best selves and your best company is going to emerge. Being culturally intelligent is also important. And perhaps this will be a journey topic down the way as well, being able to navigate different communities. If you are an organization that perhaps recruits a lot of individuals who come from different backgrounds, different religions, different countries, and I think of my community here in Sioux Falls, and I do a lot of work with construction and manufacturing, and they work with a lot of new Americans. So those businesses have to have some competency around navigating people who have different customs, different beliefs, often different religions, and grew up differently. But this can happen recruiting any type of difference into your organization, and to understand how to have conversations with them that value that diversity. And then ultimately being collaborative. And that goes back to inviting people of difference to the table. When you gather folks, when you go and seek guidance and confidence, if you will, who are you talking to? Are you talking to people who are like you? And maybe we have an affinity bias, which is a very normal type of thing to reach out to people who are going to respond in the same way. But when we think about collaboration, getting that difference of opinion and idea is going to help you make a more solid solution or strategy for your organization and for your customers. So these are the critical behaviors and traits that an inclusive leader will show up with. So in summary of the inclusive leadership behaviors, an inclusive leader is going to model vulnerability. You are going to show up beyond your job role and your job responsibility. As an inclusive leader, you're going to share a little bit about yourself as a person and really be authentic, because when you do those things, you're modeling it for your team and for your colleagues to do the same, because you are creating psychological safety for people to show up again wholly as they are. An inclusive leader is going to hold themselves accountable. They are going to be aware when they might slide into old habits, when they might not stand up and confront an offensive joke or a policy that is getting in the way of inclusion. And you really want to define what acceptable behavior is and what unacceptable behavior is. And people always say, why do we want to define acceptable? Because that helps your team recognize what they can do to help you live into your vision of becoming an inclusive organization. So really define what that looks like. And that might be using some of the Continuum to help you do that. And then certainly, besides having that code of inclusive conduct, identifying what behavior won't be tolerated. And I would encourage you to put that written down so your HR and organizational development leaders can really have that in a framework and can use that to help individuals understand when their behaviors aren't acceptable and why they're not. But as inclusive leaders, we've got to stand up to that and have those hard conversations, which are often very uncomfortable, but it requires courage again. Being aware of our privilege, thinking about, and privilege isn't just about race. I mean, we've been hearing a lot about that lately, but privilege intersects at so many different areas. I think of myself and what my privileges are or what my advantages are. I'm white, as an example. I'm able-bodied. My orientation is heterosexual or cisgender. So those privileges for me give me some ease in moving about society or interacting with individuals. So I want to be aware of that maybe another person is not going to have that same ease that I am. And how can I challenge some of the norms in my business and help redefine those and dilute the exclusionary dynamics? So really think about your privilege as an individual and how you can use that for good. I mean, that's the real exciting thing, that my privilege can help open doors for other people who I see as really talented, but maybe do not have a pathway to an opportunity. And you and I can be part of helping to create that. I've talked about taking a strong stance against bias and resistance. Have those uncomfortable conversations head on. Don't let them fester. Really important. Inviting colleagues into the dialogue, collaborating, being very transparent in your decision making and how you make decisions as an organization, instead of just having a leadership group understand those decisions. That certainly is going to help with colleague engagement. Purposefully engage your diverse individuals to have a voice and an opportunity. That could be having a professionals of color mentoring group, if you will, or a group that is a leadership development program for brand new professionals who are maybe just getting started. Because we know Gen Zers, as an example, sometimes we look at age differently and what a person's ability might be, or their ability to change because of their age. So age is part of the diversity spectrum as well. And then finally, DE&I needs to become a strategic imperative in your business if it is something that you commit to. It needs to be woven into all elements of your organization and not just siloed in one area, but really becomes part of your mission and your vision and your daily practices as an organization. Something that you want to talk about with your customers, with your clients, with your vendors, with your partners, because it's who you are and how you show up internally and then also externally. When we think of the benefits of being an inclusive organization that really values authenticity and diversity in your workplace, these 6 boxes really summarize what you can expect to see. A thriving and engaged team. Again, when I show up authentically and I know that I have a safe space to fully be who I am, I'm really feeling valued by you as my employer. and that you appreciate my differences, that my differences aren't scary to you, or something that you don't even acknowledge, but instead you're valuing who I am and celebrating those differences. And again, when we think about those statistics at the beginning of the webinar, when our colleagues and our team are engaged, they're 16% more likely to impact our revenue and our bottom line. You will have collaborative and respectful relationships. Think of a time in your business, and I'm sure you can think of many, no matter where you are in your organization, where your team did not work well together because there was difference, there was misunderstanding or lack of appreciation. And when you really start being real about difference and engaging hard conversations, and when we lean in and get to know each other as people beyond our job code, that's when we just start developing that trust. Because we recognize that, you know, we kind of live life differently, but we still want love, we still want opportunity, we still want safety. There are many things that we still want, we just may go about it doing it differently. And so being able to be authentic and move through those differences will help with collaboration and respect overall in your organization. Again, you've got to be intentional and you've got to have those hard conversations when they come, and they will. Certainly, this is going to help you have more of a dynamic, creative, innovative environment. Again, it goes back to sameness and diversity. When we're bringing a team that's all like me, who has my same worldview, my same talents, my same experiences, we're going to get a lot of the same. But when we really bring diversity together, and diverse experiences, talents, worldview, that's when you're really going to be able to innovate and create wonderful solutions for your customers. We talked about productivity and revenue. I have a webinar that I do on the business case of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it shows that diverse teams can have up to a 35% revenue increase because of that diversity. Ultimately, this is going to help your employer brand. 86% of job seekers right now are looking for a diverse employer. It's important to them. And when you think about Generation Z, so many of them throughout the country have grown up with diversity in their schools, whether it's from elementary school into college. And they really have this expectation that when they go to work, there's going to be a diverse population because that's what they're used to and that's what they value. So when you think about growing your industry, and we think about this for ourselves as part of the insurance industry, we want to become more diverse because we know it's going to attract talent. And definitely it's going to help us tell our story about engagement when we're creating opportunities to value all people. And then finally, the last box, who doesn't want this for our organizations? To uplift and empower our team members to help them participate and really own the success of the organization. So that's a huge thing. When we think about taking inclusive leadership out of our business into our community, I would invite you to think of these things. And I know a lot of people right now have been inspired by Black Lives Matter because they want to change their communities because they've seen that civil unrest. So think about the boards you're on right now and the compilation of your boards. Are there opportunities to invite different voices to that board? And consider the types of boards you volunteer for. Are there organizations that serve diverse populations and lift up underrepresented people? Perhaps that's an opportunity to engage in, as well as volunteer opportunities. Where do you as an individual volunteer, or your organization? Are there ways that you might be able to change that cadence and engage in organizations whose mission follows around diversity or inclusion? For us, the Multicultural Center here in downtown Sioux Falls has a festival of cultures that we participate in. It's a great opportunity to engage and to learn about different cultures so we can practice where we are on the continuum of leadership, but it's a way for us to talk about our industry with different individuals as well. Where do you speak, or who do you listen to? I'm so grateful that you've showed up today to get some insight into inclusive leadership, and would encourage you to consider looking for opportunities to engage. And as you develop your inclusive leadership competencies, perhaps this is something that you'll want to speak about in your communities as well. I've talked a little bit about mentoring, and this can happen in schools, it can happen in business. It's really enriching to mentor someone who has a different background than I do and really learning about them. But at the same point, I can talk about our industry and share with that individual about how vibrant it is and the opportunities there are. And while I'm investing in that person, I'm having reverse mentorship happen to me as well. We know that houses of worship, arts and culture in our neighborhoods are also opportunities. If we go out into the community, perhaps there's a Buddhist temple that you might want to check out, or inviting other people to your house of worship, again, for more of a community element. Thinking about the art that you might have in your business and how you celebrate when you get together as an organization. Thinking about your holidays. Some organizations now are having PTO time that's a floater. So if there's a holiday that you want to celebrate that your business doesn't celebrate, there's an opportunity for that colleague to look at that date. Some businesses are starting to take off Juneteenth as an example of to live into their commitment to Black Lives Matter and their Black colleagues. So thinking about how you can impact your communities is part of this as well. So what can you do before we get to the questions? What can you do to start advancing inclusive leadership right now? Read the book. You can order it online. Again, it's one of the most approachable reads that there is, very, very practical. Hopefully you've seen this. And maybe you can have this for your next book club, whether it's with your Vistage group or your networking group or your leadership team or a group of colleagues. I would really encourage you to have that conversation. The self-assessment to get an idea about your own spot on the continuum, if you will. Go to inclusiveleaderthebook.com. The self-assessment takes about 10 minutes. And it will give you a printout of where you are on that continuum. So you've got some insight. And I know the society has shared my slides. So you can go back through and have an idea where you are and maybe what some of the things that you're going through. Think about your inside circle. And I'm going to show you that the screen or this exercise. The inside circle really invites you to look at 5 to 10 people in your circle who aren't your family members. And you look at them through a diversity lens to get an idea about, is there a lot of sameness? Is there a lot of diversity? And when I took this a couple years ago, before I started my inclusive leadership journey, lots of sameness. I was meeting and talking and getting advisement and advising others who were a lot like me. And then I got intentional about finding myself in different places and my circle's changing. And it's becoming richer because of that. Ultimately, I would encourage you to talk with your leadership team about adding this type of training for your leaders and just beginning the process and stepping into it, because it's an exciting journey and it's a journey that you can be transformed as an individual and also have great impact on your organization and your industry. So with that, I'm so grateful for the time. I think I made it up on time for any questions or discussion or feedback. That is really welcome. So I will turn it back over to Dan. So thank you.
Thank you, Kira. You've shared a lot of helpful information to us, and we really appreciate that. I do not see any questions in the queue right now, but we will give everybody a minute in case they have any that want to come in right now. As Kira just mentioned, she did share her slide deck with us, and that should have come with the login information. So please refer to that. And if for some reason you can't find it, reach out to myself or Lindsay. Seeing no immediate questions in the queue, and in the interest of time, we can go ahead and wrap up the program today. I would like to thank Kira again one more time for sharing her knowledge and thoughts with us. I encourage all of you to continue to check out our website for additional information and upcoming learning opportunities related to diversity and inclusion, including the other complimentary session taking place on July 24th, when we will be gathering to discuss belonging and unconscious bias. I hope you enjoyed the program today and that you were able to put what you learned today into action. As we said before, change starts with each of us. Thank you again for your participation, and we work and learn morning to these important topics. Hope you have a great weekend. Thanks.